This whole idea about personal brand and founders being out there, it is a little bit newish and it is off-putting to a lot of people.
Patrice Poltzer, storytelling and personal brand coach.
I do have empathy for a lot of founders that maybe started their business and found a lot of success during a time when social media was not the end-all be-all of what it is today. But we live in a different marketing world today. It's more crowded, it's noisy. A lot of people are business owners, a lot of people are side hustlers, solopreneurs, words that you didn't even conceive of really before 2020. Like, solopreneur, what are you talking about? A side hustler? And now it's almost like, what's your side hustle? It's like just normal lexicon that we use in conversation. So you are the founder, but sorry, you also need to talk about your stuff, and you need to actually maybe even talk about what you believe in and what your values are. And it's not this direct, hard line of here's my business self, and I'm going to go home, I'm going to zip that shut, and I'm going to go be my personal self.
Well, hi, Patrice. I'm so excited to have you on here. When Lee and I started the podcast and started discussing what guests we wanted to have, of course, you were one of the first people I was like, we need to have Patrice on. You know, I remember when we first got introduced, and I think I can't say that about a lot of people, but you're one of the few people I've met through Instagram, which should happen more often than, nowadays, but I will forever remember you as the one person I met via Instagram. Someone from New York told me, you should follow this girl. She just moved from New York City to Lisbon. She has 3 kids. And I was like, whoa, that really sounds exactly like me. I need to meet this person. And then I think I slid into your DM like people do.
You did.
And the rest is history. Now we're friends and talking all things life, moves to Lisbon, ex-New Yorkers, and personal brand. And that's one thing I wanted to dive into today with you, because it's something that's on everyone's mind. It's something that you and I talk about a bunch. It's something that Lee and I talk about a bunch, that is so important for startup founders, brand builders, business owners, that a lot of people do not feel comfortable with. And as you know, I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm always like, Patrice, how do I put my face on Instagram? How do I talk to the camera like you do? And you're such a pro at that, and we'll dive into that a little bit later, but you obviously have experience from your days at the Today Show, and you've since built an entire business around building personal brand and around building personal stories for founders. So thank you for being here today. And
thanks for that introduction. But it's funny, like, as you were talking, because you're right, you are my Instagram friend too. And at the time, we had just moved to Lisbon around the same time, and you were in a much better, healthier mental place than I was. I was not very well. I was like, oh my God, I'm the most depressed person that she's meeting. I'm not always like this. But it's funny because that's sort of the underbelly of social media, right? There's all this bad stuff that people can say about Instagram. And sure, there is definitely a lot of negative stuff, but there's so much positive that can come out of social media. And I feel like our friendship is a testament to that. And especially for me, someone who did just do this huge life move with 3 kids, I didn't know anyone in Lisbon. You really were a bridge to this whole new world for me. Like, I didn't have friends, until I met you. And so but my point, to kind of circle it back to personal brand, that is also the upside, right? When you choose to put yourself out there, the good and maybe not always the good, you attract opportunities, even friendships, that may or may not have anything to do with business. You attract different opportunities in your life that you can't even conceive of. So I'm a huge proponent of erring on the side of putting yourself out there, because I really believe that more good comes out of showing up and putting yourself out there than kind of staying behind the scenes, staying quiet, and not wanting to do it because you're afraid.
And so for the skeptics like us, who, Lee and I have actually been burned from being the face of our first company. And there's a lot of female takedown pieces coming out. And how do you deal with that? How do you get rid of that fear of putting yourself out there, being that face? How do you balance that with, the brand itself, not overpowering the brand power either? Would love to get your 2 cents on why it matters, why you think it's important for founders to go out there and be bold about it.
Yeah. Well, so a few things there in your question. So I will say that a handful of years ago, it did not matter as much that founders put themselves out there. I was a producer at the Today Show for many years, and there were times I remember where you could go to a website, go to an about page, there would be literally nothing, some generic photo, if there was even a photo, and some, I like coffee, I like tea, and I live in California. And you're like, oh, okay, like, do you have a business? All right, maybe we can pitch this to my boss and maybe they can come on the show. And more oftentimes than not, as long as you were legit and you checked out on the phone, then you could, in theory, have a chance to come on national television, like the Today Show. I saw that change in direct real time the more that social media became front and center stage. So by the time 2016 rolled around, when we would have our, daily pitch meetings and we would have to pitch our boss what we were seeing and what we wanted to cover that week, it was no longer just acceptable to say, hey, like, there's this cool company and I heard about it and I think we should put this person. It would be like, well, why that person? And what is special about that person and why that founder? And you had to do a hard sell and a hard pitch about the founder. So I do have empathy for a lot of founders that maybe started their business and found a lot of success during a time when social media was not the end all be all of what it is today. But we live in a different marketing world today. It's more crowded. It's noisy. A lot of people are business owners. A lot of people are side hustlers, solopreneurs, words that you didn't even conceive of really before 2020. Like, solopreneur, what are you talking about? A side hustler? Huh? I mean, and now it's almost like, what's your side hustle? It's like just normal lexicon that we use in conversation. So I really think we have to take this into context that, relatively speaking, this whole idea about personal brand and founders being out there, it is a little bit newish and it is off-putting to a lot of people. And because I never before have founders had to wear so many hats. I think there was a time in business where you could just be good at, and look, there's always, this is not gospel, right? You can find supporting evidence for the opposite of what I'm about to say. But I think as a blanket rule, because I see it in my business every single day, and I saw it change in real time in the morning shows in New York, you are the founder, but sorry, you also need to you talk about your stuff, and you need to actually maybe even talk about what you believe in and what your values are. And it's not this direct, hard line of, here's my business self and I'm going to go home, I'm going to zip that shut, and I'm going to go be my personal self.
So on that point, actually, I would love to hear how you think about imposter syndrome, right? Because as the company merges with the personal brand, I actually think imposter syndrome becomes an even bigger hurdle to not just pitching your platform and yourself to venture capitalists, right? But it's just even to consumers and, like you said, PR opportunities. So how do you approach imposter syndrome? What are the tips to get over that? Is there a power pose even? Like, really? Like, how
do
are
you have a story of
it?
yourself? Like, we've all dealt with some level of imposter syndrome. Like, how have you dealt with it yourself?
And I'm sure, you ladies are so accomplished, and you're two females, and you've done a lot in the business space, and you've done a lot in the tech space, which traditionally is more male. So you're no stranger to being in male dominated niches. I will say that this whole imposter syndrome, it is more female grounded. Like, men don't sit around talking about, oh my God, I'm imposter syndrome. Like, you know what I mean? So I do think there's an element of words that can kind of catch on, and all of a sudden it's like, what's your imposter syndrome? And so I think if we kind of like strip that back a little bit, it is, if anyone that is trying to do something bigger than themselves, or anyone that's trying to do something new, man, female, whatever you are, you're going to feel uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable, then you're probably not pushing yourself enough or stretching yourself enough, because that means you've already done it and you're comfortable.
Yeah, I totally hear that.
Yeah.
But for like, yeah, so the discomfort though, like how do you get through that? Because I even think like when you're like doing this introduction, I was thinking to myself, because I am very inspired with how you pitch yourself in a sense on Instagram. But when I were like, if I were to even try to do that, I would feel like almost ridiculous, like in a sense, because I feel like now that like personal branding's become a thing, right? Like influencing, I feel like is a dirty word. Like, so I'm even thinking like, me out there like filming this story.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
No,
you're embarrassed that your friends are seeing you like that. You're embarrassed your mom sees you like that. I mean, we talk about it all the time.
I love your mom.
It's embarrassing. You do love my mom, but she loves you.
Okay, here's the thing, Lee. I've only been doing it longer. That's the only difference between me and you. The only difference is that I have so much more muscle memory. It's like Alex kicks my ass at Pilates. I can't even like go next to her at class because I'm like, I don't understand how your thigh moves like that or your leg goes like that. Mine does not do that. But I know that if I keep doing the Pilates as much as Alex and go all the time, maybe I'm not at Alex level, but I'll get close. So it's just like anything, I remember, and look, and I get it because it's funny. I came from TV. So when I, by accident, started my business, I started it not because I wanted to start a business or be an entrepreneur. I started it very cliche. I had an awful layoff experience at a startup. I had no esteem. It just completely rattled every sense of a worth that I had. And I couldn't interview. I remember being like, I literally cannot go out and interview in New York media right now to get a new job because I would just be like, I have no skills. You don't want to hire me. I just had nothing. So I started doing like just side projects because my husband's like, we need you to start earning here, baby, toddler, New York City, all the things. And so when I started this, I did not go on camera and promote myself, say one word to Instagram, you name it, for 4 years. I had a business for 4 years before I turned the camera on me. And the only reason that I turned the camera on me is because COVID shut my business down. I was a video production. I had a studio. We did work for brands. I was behind the scenes. I did brand video for you name it, Netflix, Lululemon, all Amazon. I wasn't like, you didn't even know I had no public Instagram. I had nothing, no LinkedIn. And then COVID shut my business and I was pregnant with my third child. My husband decided that year to do something, start a bee. I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. And he's like, I got to make money. I lead to make money. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I got to figure out how to sell online. Like so many people and businesses had to do in 2020. I was part of that wave. So I've really only been doing this personal branding type of marketing for myself for 4 years, and I've had a business for 7.5.
And has it changed the minute you turned the camera on? Is that when you saw the results of your business grow?
No, it was not right away. Absolutely not. In the beginning, oh my God, I couldn't even talk on camera, which is so funny because I came from TV. It's what I did for a living. So people just assume, oh, you came from TV. You're so natural at it. No, I wasn't. I was a producer. I was behind. I was Jake, I told people what to do. I interviewed people. I got the story. I wrote the story. I was not the person standing, with a microphone. So it really was a switch for me. And in the beginning, this is 2020, right? So different social media landscape. But in 2020, all I thought was the same, Lee, was I'm not an influencer. I don't, what are you talking about? I don't take pictures of myself and sell things. So it was a big disconnect. So in the beginning, all I did was, I think Reels had just came out and I would just stand there and do the pointing and I felt so stupid. I would try to do lip sync, that was so uncomfortable. This is not me. I'm trying to do funny lip syncs. It is very cringe. And then I would also regurgitate quotes that weren't mine, oh, every day, live like your last. And it wasn't even my quote. And I would put this stuff on the internet. It's on the internet. I have it all still the same. It's mortifying because I thought that in order, and this is probably my imposter syndrome, if I think about it, I didn't think I had anything to say because what I make videos, who cares? What am I going to say about making videos? I was not connecting the dots until a woman who is still my mentor. We work together all the time, until I met her online, and she completely lifted my belief process. She's like, what's wrong with you? She's like, you're dumb. Like, you're so dumb. Like, she goes, you are, turn your camera. You're a storyteller and you tell stories. But you know what was interesting, what kind of always stuck with me, and this is maybe just anecdotal, but she grew up and she left the Mormon church. She had this really crazy kind of traumatic upbringing, had kids at like 19, right? And in the middle of America. And she goes, people that are from the cities, like New York, LA, all the big cities, you have access. People in other places don't have access. So your access, you create your own access. And what is access? The internet, online. So she said, people like you don't understand this world is maybe intrinsically. And so when she said
never needed it.
I never needed it because I had to go to 30 Rock every day and Fifth Avenue. And she kind of like made me look at it. And this is the whole thing about impostery. I was like, who am I not to have to go online and promote myself? That's a privilege problem, I think, because you know what? Like, you tell that to someone in the middle of whatever, maybe doesn't have access to college, their family doesn't have money, who knows their situation. They don't have the privilege of not doing anything they can to connect and get people to hear them, and the internet and showing up is how they do that. And so she really reframed my own thought process, and I'm like, you know what, quit being an ass. Like, get yourself out there. Like, if you can't talk about your business or how you can help, then because you're afraid of the friend that's gonna, even my mom or whatever. I'm like, so I think about it all the time.
You clearly found your voice, right? Since the lip syncing and all of that stuff.
I do not do
you
that
found
anymore,
your voice, and it's working, and you have a growing business, which is really, really impressive. But you said something on LinkedIn. You do some really good LinkedIn posts. So let's make sure that you share your details at the end. But you said something that was really resonating with me, which was that your content doesn't have to be for everyone. It doesn't have to be for your mom. It doesn't have to be for your best childhood friend who's going to be cringing looking at you self-promoting yourself. And I think that's a good reminder for our listeners that you can self-promote, and you're not self-promoting for, your cousin's best friend that you met once years ago. You're self-promoting yourself for the people that want to listen, that are interested in what you have to sell.
Oh, I still get DMs all the time, and it's always from people that you go to their account and they have like 5 followers, they have no posts, they've never put themselves out there, and they're always the ones that are the loudest critics. And I all the time, or you're cringe, or I don't know how it's like that backwards compliment. I don't know how you show up all the time and just talk about yourself, and you're sort of like, oh my God, and so every now and then, if you catch me at a low moment, or if I'm feeling vulnerable with what's going on, I can let it like, oh God, I feel a little bit of shame, right? Like, oh God, I am being annoying, or I'm too much, or, oh, Patrice, why did I have to go and share about this, right? That is, but then I catch myself because you just think of all the people that I'm not trying to help that person. And also, we live in a big world. I think most of us aren't trying to be Netflix. We're not trying to be Amazon. We're not trying to blanket the market. We're trying to really find our pocket of the world or the internet and our people that want to learn from us or buy our product or buy our Hawkins. Like, we're trying to find those people, and that's not everyone. And so it kind of takes the pressure off that, like, people are not always going to like what you have to say.
And how do you think cultural norms impact how we promote ourselves, how we put even how we have self-doubt? I'd just be curious, like how you think about that.
This is a really great question. And that's so true. Cultural norms do come into play. Like, there are certain cultures where it is just not cultural, right? For them they're more like respected cultures, or it's more respected to elders, or, and, in that 100% does. But I also, what the cool thing about all of this is there are no rules. There's not a rule that says the only way to show up and to be, open and out there is to be really loud and bubbly and excitable. That's not, one of my favorite client stories is this guy. We still do some work together. He is the most stoic, I mean, borderline, like you talk to him and you're like, oh my God. I mean, he has like no inflection in his voice, you're staring at him and you're sort of sometimes waiting for him to get to the next word. And I remember when I first started working with him for video, I was like, person, in case he ever listened to this, I don't want to call his name out. Person, I'm like, you're like putting me to sleep. Like, come, but then you know what? He's like, I'm not. But then he actually ended up teaching me, I think, a lot more in our engagement, because I realized, oh, like he's probably a breath of fresh air for people that are like him, that feel shy and feel like, and he has a massive LinkedIn following. He is so successful, and he is a little bit stoic. He still doesn't intonate, and so it's like how we are attracted to.
He found his voice and it works for him. And there is a following.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the key
That's so interesting.
And I think we all know it as humans because you can feel it, and also showing up all the time doesn't mean you're real or you're relatable or you're authentic. That does not mean that, you sense it, right? When you're watching someone and something feels a bit off, or it does actually feel cringy because there's like an intention behind it that feels like it's not hitting. But when someone's just themselves, even if you're like, oh my God, like how do they do that? Or that's not my personality. But if they're themselves, you're still able to sort of appreciate like, wow, okay, they're themselves. So the intentionality matters the most, and not showing up for the sake of showing up and being in someone's face. We don't need more of that.
And so walk us through very basic storytelling techniques, storytelling 101 for our listeners who are, started a business, don't know how to put themselves out there. There's always that feeling that, besides the cringy part that we just talked about, it always feels a little bit braggy, and like how to self-promote in a way that's not like, I'm killing it on all fronts and I have this perfect little life. And you're really good at showing your vulnerable sides and within your social media. So how do you balance that? And how do you, what's the number one advice you'll give to a founder putting themselves out there for the first time?
It's a great question. And being on LinkedIn, I'm newer to LinkedIn, and when I first started getting on LinkedIn, I was pretty horrified. Everyone is talking about their award and everyone's talking about their cool conference that they're at. And I'm like, oh my God, like this is, there's more to the story, but you're just like, come on. So one of the biggest things I always tell myself is no one cares about me. No one cares about me, right? Because everyone is worried about themselves and everyone's in their own head. And so whenever actually, let me use a better example. Okay. I won an award earlier this year where I was flown in. It was a big deal. It was like this Women's Entrepreneur Award. And I know that it's important that I put that out there because that gives myself credibility as a business owner. And that also allows me to attract a different type of clientele. I also know no one cares that I won an award. So I remember before I was doing this post, I was like, how am I going to play this so I'm not that ass, right? Where I'm like, oh my God, I'm so honored that I won this award. I'm like, no, I'm like, stop it. I'm so privileged. Like, no. So, but it's important that you share those things. So the way to do that is to back it into a story of when you weren't there, right? And try to imagine and my job is to actually make someone care that I won that award. So how I did that was I backed up the story. I backed up about like you said, some more vulnerable moments when I got fired from, a startup, when I thought I was on a certain path in New York television and I wasn't, when I, even moving to Lisbon, and I fell into a pretty deep depression for 4 months that totally rocked me and scared my family. So I started by relatability. So I'm like, where can I get down potentially to someone's level, a stranger's level, to say, okay, maybe I've never moved to Lisbon, or maybe I've never worked in New York television, but I can relate to those feelings that you just mentioned. And now I'm thinking of my own incidences in my head. So first you set the stage, right? To give context to who I am. Then there's a transition there, right? And then I transition out to, well, through, this and this, like, through different efforts, or through, like being scared to go to networking events, but making myself go anyway, and being scared to do this, but learning how to video edit anyway, kind of. Then what you're doing is you're endearing someone to you. That way, then when I talk about my award, people are rooting for me. They're like, yeah, girl, like, I don't know who you are, but good for you. And now I'm inspired because you took me through a little bit of a story. You took me through a journey. People don't do that enough. They just spit it out because they're like, this is important, because it is important. But in not every story has to be like this long. It doesn't need to be a sob story either, or a monologue, but you need to remind yourself that no one cares about whatever you're going to talk about. So what can I do to immediately bring myself down to a level? You know who does this brilliantly? And I don't feel like she's used all the time, but she's on my brain because she's in my feed all the time with her new brand, Sarah Blakely, with Spanx and now Sneaks. She's a billionaire. She's a billionaire. That woman is on her social media every single week. She is talking about a fail that she did with her kid, or she's talking about a moment that she had with her husband that like puts her in a negative light. She's talking about how she's nervous to go surprise her very first customer with the sneak shoe that she just did today. And she's like, I'm so nervous to knock on this lady's door. You're like, dude, you're Sarah Blakely, a billionaire. She's masterful, or she's showing you her hand.
I love her so much. Oh my gosh.
But that's what it is. It's that. Yeah. So
she's relatable. She's relatable. We all see ourselves in her story.
Yes. Even though, like, she's not relatable. Like, hello, what you've done and what you've accomplished in your life, and you're not really relatable. But
that could have been her storytelling approach. She picked a different approach. She could have been like, it's amazing, everything I touch turns to gold, but she didn't.
Yes. And I think before this, I do believe, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, how the landscape of marketing has changed. There was a time in marketing where that pedestal, that was it. It was like, oh my God, like, we're here and these people are here and we look up. But because social media has peeled back transparency, and audiences expect more out of their companies, they expect more out of their founders, that doesn't work anymore. And so that's the shift. And a lot of this showing up in personal brand is because we're in a new market landscape, and this might change, and this is going to change again, as we evolve in another 5 to 10 years as well.
So I'd be curious to know, thinking about those moments, right, where you're not on the top of the mountain, right? You're hustling to get there. You're in the difficult parts of one's journey, but you need to, again, have that confidence to put yourself out there, to share that side, that vulnerability. Is there, I like, personally, I love a power pose, right? Before I go into a meeting and before I pitch, I really, like, I remember I once saw a TED Talk, and I forget who the woman was, but she was like, put your hands on your hips, like, go, like, talk to yourself in the mirror. And I do it.
And I used to do that in the bathroom. Lee and I, before pitches, would go in the bathroom and look at each other, hands up in the air.
And then we'd hold each other's hands. I'm not kidding. Me and Alex would hold each other's hands, look each other in the eyes, and would say, unstoppable. And it was like our thing.
I love that.
That's our power word. We have a power word.
That's our power word. And because Alex and I once went to this hypnotist, and she was like, whenever you say the word unstoppable and you look in each other's eyes, you're unstoppable. And we were like, yes. So I'd be curious to know, like, in those moments, like when you said you were like very depressed when you initially moved to Lisbon, but you still had to put yourself out there because you're building a business. What is your power pose? Like, what allows you to show up even when you really don't feel like showing up, or you don't have the confidence to show up, or you feel like that imposter in your shoes?
So I think for me personally, and this is unique to me, but because I was a storyteller for so long and told so many other people's stories and hard stories, refugees and in camps and mothers that just lost their babies on rafts, like, who just drowned. Like, I have been around, like, some really hard stuff and have had to tell those stories to the wider public, right? And make people care that might not care about different issues. So honestly, my power pose is there's a few people in particular that they will stay with me till I die, like, cause they changed my life, and I think about them. And as soon as I think about them, I just get out of myself, because anything that I'm about to do is nothing compared to a lot of the stuff that they have gone through. So I think it's sometimes just perspective. And so like power posing and all of that and saying you're unstoppable, it's like, that's another version of perspective. And my perspective is the same thing. It's just like thinking of some of the people I've met when I was at the Today Show. I got to do a lot of cool things. And that always just, I don't know, there's another guy too that he's a New Yorker and horrible home life, horrible, anything you think of it happened. And he's very abused, and he's like one of the biggest artists now online. And he, has all these foundations, and I just think of him. I'm like, oh my God, like, because he's putting his art online, and he got viral on TikTok. And I don't know, like, I think of those stories, and just, me talking about, my storytelling programs or whatever, like that doesn't seem as frightening.
I love that. And Patrice, in this world of cancel culture, there's always a fear in the back of my own head. For example, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to, appear a certain way that's going to be interpreted? And we know how things fly through social media in an instant. How do you get over that? How do you stay authentic to the way you speak and where you're from and how you look, and without the fear of, the next day being canceled?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And let me tell you a story, because this is probably the best example I have of that. So I interviewed a woman about a year and a half ago on my Instagram. I used to do an interview series. I should probably get back into it. I loved it. But anyway, and you remember The Wing?
Audrey Gelman.
Yeah. So she was reported into whatever the founder was, like Audrey. I can't think of her name.
Yeah.
She was their head of everything, like head of community, head of everything. She was there during that whole, when it imploded, right? This is around Black Lives Matter, all that stuff. And there was a petition of she woke up to 15,000 people had signed the petition wanting her fired. And it was the biggest shame of her life. So she ended up leaving, and obviously The Wing completely self-imploded. And she was a client of mine, and I never knew this. Okay. And I remember I always felt like there was, and I knew she worked at The Wing, but she never, I don't know. She just never talked about it. But I always felt like something was, I knew something. I was like, something just feels off. She just feels like she's hiding something. Right. And I remember one day, we were talking, and we were just chatting on one of our calls. And she goes, I'm going to tell you something. And I said, what? She tells me the story, and she goes, and I'm going to tell you something. She goes, I take full responsibility for what I did. She goes, those people had a reason to put me on that list. And I have now had reflection when I look back at my inaction and stuff. I wasn't always my fault, because I got carried away and blah, blah, blah. But she goes, I said to her, I said, I think you should own that. I said, I think people would. And so you know what she did? She ended up writing this essay, this personal essay. And it wasn't I take all responsibility, but it was just acknowledging I made some mistakes. Some of it wasn't my fault. But I made, and she took back her story. And so she went from being canceled, her name, I didn't realize this, but in New York circles, she was in startup circles, you could not say her name and people would be like, ooh. She wrote that essay, and she said that it, all these people came out, people that she did maybe piss off, thanked her, healed, and it's been this healing thing. And now it is part of her story. She actually has it now, in her material of I was part of the kind of, I've gone through hard, and you know what? It makes her she now works with startups, and she coaches founders, and she's brilliant at community growth. But you know what? She knows because she's weathered some crap. So I think actually this cancel culture, look, there's extreme examples of that, and you can't always like control the internet. But I think for most people that aren't maybe like so celebrity, right? I think if there was a little bit more, maybe just acknowledgement or just humanness. Like I made some mistakes. I also like was young and whatever. People are pretty forgiving because everyone has made mistakes and made like bad choices. I don't know if that answered your question, but
it totally did. My takeaway from this is own your mistakes, be open about them. Make it a part of your story. It will make you reflect on what happened. It will make people understand maybe some of the process.
And sometimes you need separation, right? Like for this woman, this happened 20 whatever year it was, and then it took her like 2 years to kind of come up. But it was that much of a thing where it owned her. That owned her. And it was only when she was able to take back her own story. And that's why I always say to people, I had another client too that she is an immigrant business coach. She works specifically with immigrants. And she was in an arranged marriage and it was like she has this insane background. And she left this arranged marriage because he was abusive. And she was annihilated. She was an ex from her community, like was not allowed to come back. It was like really bad. And she could never talk about it. And it was only after like kind of processing it and realizing that there were a lot of people in her position here. And she was able to come out. I mean, she's been on Business Insider. She's on entrepreneur.com. She's like one of the top people like, in her field now. I mean, so when you have a story that holds such power over you and you have shame from it, I'm not saying you do that right away, because I do believe when you're in the mess, you shouldn't necessarily talk about things. You have to take your own time. But I have never met anyone that has gone through something hard or maybe uncomfortable that has come out and gotten in front of it and hasn't felt better. And like this woman is not canceled anymore, right? Like she was canceled for a bit. She's not canceled anymore.
She got out of it.
She got out of it because people like rallied against her, and she's like crazy successful. She's still in New York City. Like, so yeah, I think that's a like example that comes to mind when I think cancel.
Yeah. Now, I was just going to ask for one actionable thing. Let's say for Lee and I, who are a little bit cautious about putting ourselves out there, or for our listeners, or always a little bit uncomfortable. Like if we have to do something next week, like give us one thing we should do, like a one step towards self-promotion that gets us in it.
Okay. So, how I'm always like, you're such a badass. Like, you really are though, right? So here's the thing. In the beginning, I think it can be really hard to most people are not born storytellers. You're not just like, I'm going to tell you a story, or like, let me tell you about my life or when I was a kid. Like, you're not going to do that. But you have so much first seat knowledge, backstage. Like, I mean, like I said, you've sold multiple businesses. You are the founder of one of the most coveted viral bag that,
Hulkin.com or Hulkin.com.
Everyone wants it. No, but you know what I mean? Like you've done, and you're so, humble about, like, you're unassuming, like you would never think that about you because you're not, but that's what makes you so cool. I mean, you even if it's like whatever makes you most excited about, I know you're a product person, right? So like this whole Hulkin experience, do you know how many product founders would die to have a little bit of advice for how do I get on QVC like you did? Or how do I get, you didn't have a publicist. How on earth did you get on TV? So you have a lot of knowledge that you have just because you've lived it, you've done it, even just to start small and just factual based, right? Like but the storytelling will naturally weave, because if you're going to talk to someone about, if you're a product founder, how you get on QVC, I'm just using this as an example, you naturally are going to talk about, well, let me tell you about how I got on QVC because I didn't have any TV experience either. And here's what I did. already I'm hooked and I'm like, oh, that's inspiring. Oh, cool. Me too. So I think I always tell people in the beginning, start with where you feel really confident. And whatever that is in your business, whether you're the operations person, whether you're the master marketer, whether you're the person that the CEO, like start with like that stuff that you could talk about. Like I could talk about storytelling all day long. Like most people are like, that's so boring. But there's something that you, Alex and Lee, could probably just bore someone to death. Like stop talking to me about spreadsheets, right? There's a market for that. Like people are wanting to know that. So start there. And then once you start getting feedback loops, because you start getting then, oh, DMs, that's cool. Oh my God, that's interesting. It's like you kind of get that little piece of like dopamine validation that you're on the right path. Then it becomes easier to show up. So for example, even with some of my vulnerable
and to narrow
stuff,
down.
What about the person who doesn't have a Hulken bag in their portfolio? You're looking at it. But seriously, like what with someone who's just starting out, who doesn't have the success yet? Like the person that's building their dream, but it's still really in fruition. They haven't raised their first round. They believe in their concept, but they have no traction. Like to me, like I think that's the harder story to tell. Like I could tell a bajillion stories for Alex. Like Alex is a rock star. Like what she's done with Hulken Bag is insane. But like, what would be the story that I would tell, right? And more importantly, like, is it like I often see a lot of your content when you're telling a story, like it's very focused, like a lot of like not self, like like the camera's on yourself, then the camera will be a bit on your family, like where you are, like I'm sure you're being very intentional with how you're often on the go, like you're like walking all about, like it's so I'd just be curious, like is that like, are you very intentional with even how you're filming that story? But like, how are you telling a story when you've yet to have that success and you're trying to use storytelling to build that brand?
Yes. Okay. I love this question. And I have another example for you. So
just don't take off any more items of clothing. I know this topic is getting very hot. You started with a sweater, a shirt. Like, I don't know what's coming off next.
Keep it up.
I'm just like, I am like sweating. I'm a sweater. So, oh my God. I'm like, I think I've been menopausal for like
no, please.
Years.
I've just been thinking like this is going to get a very exciting. This is going to do the clickbait. This is how we tell the story.
I'll get you some
People are going to listen just to see what comes off next.
Yeah, see, this is part of my storytelling, right? Like edge of seat. Okay, so this is what I tell, and actually this is what I'm telling a woman right now who's a client. So she's new in her entrepreneurial journey. She came from corporate. She had a corporate job, right? But she's like done with corporate. You get this a lot, right? You have these pivoters that now all of a sudden didn't have to necessarily be online. And they're like, oh crap, like I got to make this work. There is nothing more sexy and more attractive than building in public wherever you are at whatever stage. Like, do you know how many people are sitting in their corporate jobs dying and hate what they do and would give anything to make the leap? So can you imagine if I'm sitting in a job and I see this girl who just left corporate a couple months ago, who is me, who's been unhappy for years, but made the leap. I am dying to see how are you doing this? Like, oh, you have to get a website, or you have to figure out where to work in your day, or you have to schedule your time. How do you do that? Like, that's such basic stuff. But wherever you are in your journey, I always tell people that's perfect, because think about yourself. Like, there are people in my industry that are so far ahead of me. I am overwhelmed by them. I am like, you're too high up that I can't relate to you, because what do you mean you're like making $100,000 a day and you're in these like fancy masterminds with all these people that I know? I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh yeah, find your people. I'm like, stop it. So for me, like I am more attracted to people that aren't necessarily as accomplished yet. Because I'm not there yet. So it's like I think I don't know if it answers your question, but it doesn't need to be accomplishments and revenue and being on QVC. Like, that's Alex's world right now, and she's going to be attracted to maybe a certain entrepreneur who wants to get there and is there, but maybe she's not going to be that inspiring to someone starting out because she's too ahead, right? But that means that there's other people in that space that there's room for, and that's the new person starting out that maybe you're pivoting and you just sold a company too. Like, I don't think, what are you doing now? I'm sure you're going through things like, I have a new identity. And God, even though people think I sold this company and have it all figured out, I feel like I'm back at square one. I'm just making this up for you. But that would be attractive to the people. There's a lot of people like you that are maybe doing big pivots, right?
So basically what you're saying is like storytell in both like the downs and the ups, right? Like when you get to QVC, but then also when you're in the beginning phases of,
and that there's always an audience for it, whatever the stage you're in.
Yeah. And you know what? And this is what most people don't do, myself included, like I have to consciously. So for example, in the beginning of this year, I'm relatively new to courses and programs. That was not my core business. But it is now because I live in another country, right? I don't have my studios anywhere. Anyway, so I'm learning all of this stuff that's very new to me. And I had a launch in the spring of a certain program that this is gonna go gangbusters. Like I just thought that this was gonna be so obvious and so many people were gonna buy it. Like right then and there, like don't ever think that. But guess what? It didn't. Like it did it. Like it actually did so bad that I had to change strategies for literally the rest of the year because I was counting on that to like propel different things and it didn't. And you know what? I could have glazed over that. I could have been like, you know what? But you know what? I did 2 newsletters where they were super in depth. I'm talking numbers. I took screenshots. I'm like, this is what I made. This is like what I'm telling you. This is how many viewers I had. So I had more people reach out to me and be like, thank you. Because, you just think that everyone is getting on, they're getting press and like getting 1 million views and they have 10,000 followers. Like, and so I do, to your point, what you just said, Lee, more people I wish would show a little bit of the underbelly, but we're in this mode sometimes where we think it discredits us. And I get it because as females too in certain spaces, like, yeah, like you have to play that a little bit probably carefully, right? Otherwise it's like you're already dealing with like genderism. So I get that certain industries, maybe there's tweaks to it, but more of the real stuff, people want that.
Yeah, and I also think it's not just relatable, but it's also just more likable. Like, I don't know. I feel like there is this like pushback to like the influencer, whether you're influencing about like a product or like your own like tech product or even like physical products. But like, that's the thing. That's why I think we're feeling uncomfortable being like influencers or even trying to be an influencer because it's like, to me, it's like kind of like, ugh. But I think is you change it more to being like showing like reality, like real world. Like here is how messy my living room is, right? Like here is like, I'm doing my podcast in my living room because the rest of the house is too small or like whatever it is. Or like, but that's where I feel like uncomfortable with like putting myself out there because I do like, right, you're balancing, you want to put yourself out there and be something that people want to aspire to. While at the same time, you don't want to be like, it's not the full picture, right? Like only 1% of someone's day is actually like all sun and roses.
Well, let me ask you this question. Do you believe that you have people to help? Like, do you think that there are people out there that would want to know stuff from
everybody
you?
wants advice, first of all.
Yeah. No, definitely right. No, I think Alex and I started Unfinished Business because we're constantly inundated with founders reaching out to us being like, how do I get started? How do you do this? How do you do that? And Alex and I are very vulnerable actually with our feedback. Like the story of all of our journeys have not been like this straight line up. It's been actual hustle and exhausting and tiring. And I think that's why Alex and I are as close as we are. Like we feel like we've had to battle with every idea, against like, to get it to where they go, right? For it to become successful. It wasn't easy. And I think that's what we share with people who reach out to us. But at the same time, I think social media like Instagram or LinkedIn, like you said, it's like a little feels uncomfortable to show all those true colors.
Well, here's what I want to say to you, and you remind me of I'm working with a private client right now. It's a male founder. He is very successful, and he has never been at the front of his company. He hasn't had to, and until recently, he's doing something different, and he's going into these big meetings, investor meetings with like Goldman, and people don't know his company, even though he's better than the competitors. They don't know him. He's like, oh my god. So it has been very hard. It has been very hard to get him to do the things that I need him to do. And every time I just keep telling him this, how he leads and how he runs a business, he is the best person. Like, he's such a great guy. Like, people will run through walls for him. He's never had to lay off anyone. He has zero churn. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. Like, the things he does in his business are unheard of. And he's just like, well, I'm just like, I want to support my people and I want them to have nice lives. I'm like, no, not everyone thinks like that. Like, and he's in the tech space. Like, we need more leaders like you. And so here's the thing when I say to you, Lee, like, you and Alex, and I don't know your background, like, of what you've done, but I'm willing to bet that you have had to do a lot of things and hardships, and yet you've gotten to this place. And not because you're like an asshole, right? Like, you've gotten to this place and people love you and want advice from you, and like because you're doing things a certain way. We need examples like that. Like, we need role models of, it doesn't need to be cutthroat, or it doesn't need to be women at the top being catty to other women, because there's room for everyone. And look at you two, like, you guys are really good friends and like legit good friends. So, and you do business together, which, what's the narrative? You can't do business with friends because it's going to ruin the friendship. You guys buck that tradition. So even right there, that's a whole bucket of topics right there. And maybe we debunk that. Like, why is that constantly, so there's so much. So I just think sometimes too, it's like looking at what isn't there out there. And there's a lot of crap on LinkedIn, but there's not a lot of female founders kind of rallying together. And, you two have been complimenting each other this whole podcast. Like, and you guys have told business, like, I'm sure you've had to go through some hard stuff where it could have been friendship ending, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
So even that alone, like, how are you guys still like
that's
ride or
a great
dies
story.
and posting,
Yeah.
videos of you guys dancing on Instagram, and yet you're still like building businesses together. That's really cool. So
I'll
it's
tell
like
you why, because you got to keep your enemies close.
Exactly.
That's true.
That's what kept us together this whole time. Well, Patrice,
Exactly.
thank you. We're almost at time.
Thank you so much.
We have 2 minutes left. I just want you, in 30 seconds or less, tell us about the epic Usher story that you love to tell. And not more than 30 seconds. And then the second and last question I want you to answer is what book you would recommend our listeners to read this year.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Really quick Usher story. I was producing a story on Usher. I was like 9 months pregnant, and he was very late to a live Today Show Plaza hit. No one misses a Today Show Plaza live hit. They had already teased him in the credits. And it was about 3 minutes to his hit. And I was outside running on 48th Street, so pregnant, on a phone, screaming at his publicist, being like, how are you missing a hit? So anyway, this is a hit. I get a message from my boss. You need to get down to the control room immediately. And I'm like, I'm going to be fired. Like, this is a big deal. And I was sitting in the lobby, and all of a sudden Usher comes in with like 50 people. And at the time, whoever he was with was pregnant, but like, it wasn't really out. I don't know if it was a girlfriend or his wife. I don't know. Someone was pregnant. And this woman comes up to me and she's like, are you Patrice, or the publicist? And this woman goes to Usher and she goes, did you just make this beautiful pregnant woman? She goes, oh, she was so disgusted with him. He goes, I am so sorry. Take me to your boss. He goes downstairs to the control room. I open the door, and I'm standing there with Usher, and he just goes, if anyone fires this pregnant woman, he's like, you're going to take it up with me. He stayed with me the whole day. I love him. He could sell me air, and I'm like, I will buy air from you. He's such a stand-up guy. So anyway, that is my Usher story in 30 seconds.
Love it. And you did it perfectly within 30 seconds. Now, one book that you recommend for anyone to read this year.
Oh my God. It's so funny. I have actually, what one of my favorite books is this a woman, her name is Jessica Zweig. And she has a book called Simply Be. And she's on her second book now. But her first book called Simply Be, I have probably read that book. My toxic trait is I order business books off of Amazon. Well, I used to in New York. And my husband's like, do you want to add another just business stack to the pile that you will not read? And I'm like, it just like makes me feel better. This is the only book that I have read 3-4 times. I bought the workbook. So Simply Be by Jessica Zweig, Zweig. Yeah.
Amazing. Patrice, thank you so much. It was so fun to have you. And we're excited to publish this.
Take it off.
Take everything off.
All right, the shirt's coming off now.